The Liberation Club, Episode 3 of My Liberation Notes returns to find Mr. Goose still reeling over Mi Jiyoung's words about his life. She wants him to worship her, turning away from drink, and to give his life purpose. Instead though, he turns and walks away, pointing out that she knows nothing about him. Mr. Gu is seemingly content with living life out in the countryside alone. He doesn't want anything but to live a peaceful life. Because of what's happened, Mi Jiyoung is reluctant to head home. Instead, she spends some time with her work colleagues, who are surprised to find her reluctant to go home. She even misses the last train too, succumbing to peer pressure. Unfortunately, in her desire not to go, she finds herself all alone and walking past intimidating guys by their parked car late at night. They don't hurt her though, thankfully, getting in their car and driving off. This is also helped somewhat by Mr. Gu arriving, clinking past her with a bag full of alcohol. At work the next day, Mi Jiyoung finds herself pressured to join a club. She just sees this as another route to disappointment though, admitting that she doesn't really find anything fun, given she's stuck in the humdrum of life. Unfortunately, that humdrum is made all the worse by the long hot summer days and the horrid commute. Honestly, there is nothing worse than getting on public transport in the summer with no aircon. Yuck. Meanwhile, Gai Jiyoung heads out on a blind date, where she admits her commute times are long, and she's struggling to find someone she really connects with. It doesn't help that Jiyoung-soo had her saved in his phone as pickup girl. Gai Jiyoung goes on a big old scathing and brutal monologue about her ex, leaving her date a confounded mute. Gai Young's open nature of chatting about anything is something Chang Hee is shocked to hear that night. He calls her out for being way too forward, and suggests she just stay single from now on. In the middle of this disagreement, Mi Jiyoung is encouraged to head over and see Mr. Gu, given he always has alcohol, and they can have some booze together. Now, Du Huan actually has been over to Mr. Gu's place, and admits that the man always drinks alone, but changes where he sits, and his shot glass given he drinks with 2 or 3 alone, throughout the night. Upon hearing all this, Gai Jiyoung decides to turn in for the night, while Chang Hee heads over to Gu's place to drink with him. Only, when he tries to open one of the cupboards, the one with Gai Young's note in, he slams it shut, and asks if he seems pathetic. The night is one big dud and Chang Hee heads home alone. Meanwhile, Gai Young finally plucks up the courage, and speaks to her boss, pointing out that she's never actually been given a lottery ticket, or any sort of affection from him at all, not like the others in the office. He apologizes and eventually takes her out to have a drink. While there, Gai Young speaks openly about everything she's feeling, including how everyone in her life seems to skip over her, shattering the poor woman's pride. The pair have a really interesting chat, discussing what sort of drama they're like, with her boss eventually realizing that she's akin to slice of life dramas. After a mixed evening, he prepares to head home, but this only exacerbates Gai Young's feelings, given she believes he's only doing this out of guilt and can't wait to go home. Gai Young is desperate to find someone who genuinely wants to be with her. On the train home, Gai Young scoffs at a billboard reading, "Something good will happen to you today." However, on the train happens to be Chang Hee's ex, who decided to come to Dangmi station. Only, she realizes that it's nothing special and gets the last train back to Seoul. Gai Young grills Chang Hee that night over what happened with Yirin, wanting to know all the details. Chang Hee believes the reason stems from the fact she realized what a pathetic loser he is. He's sure she wants better and doesn't want to be held back by her. Only, her little trip to Dangmi station was actually as a result of curiosity. As we cut across to her on the train back, she thinks to herself how every time she'll pass the station, she'll think of Chang Hee now. Chang Hee meanwhile, heads over to Mr. Gu's place and apologizes for his attitude last time they met. He decides to just call him Gu, and admits he's not usually that rude. The man is silent, as per the norm, and eventually shuts the door on him as Chang Hee heads outside, and uses the buckets of water to wash himself. When their parents arrive home from the funeral they've attended, they're livid over the guys only just heading home. The thing is, the pair don't seem to realize how hard their kids work, and how brutal this commute actually is. The funny thing is, at work Mi Jiyoung finds herself about to make some new friends. Genuine friends this time, not the cliquey girls who are only interested in her gossip. Still without a club, Mi Jiyoung settles on the name the Liberation Club because they want to be liberated, given how trapped they feel. It's actually a really fitting name, something that Sangmin clings to. As they leave work, the faint wisps of a smile can be seen on Mi Jiyoung's face, as she's starting to find a purpose and enjoy her life. Back home, she speaks to Mr. Gu and asks whether he wants her to worship him instead, given he's never felt whole either. He doesn't reply, but it is something that he thinks about overnight. Anyway, Mi Jiyoung suggests they should at least say hi to one another in the morning, as Gu starts to converse with her. Baby steps and all that. Mi Jiyoung hurries for the bus and makes it just in time. My liberation notes is really starting to grow on me. The characters are really well written, and there's a lot of depth to these guys. Those quiet moments of reflection are far more spaced out around bites of meaningful dialogue, and there's a consistency now, a rhythm to let us see Chang Hee, Gai Yeong and Mi Jiyoung's lives. All three siblings are very relatable too, with Gai Jiyoung desperate for love and just rambling on, wanting to be herself at every opportunity, but finding herself alienating everyone around her in the process. It's heartbreaking to see, but also something that shows she has a big heart and just wants to be loved. Likewise, Chang Hee doesn't think he's good enough and is paranoid, almost ashamed really that he lives the way he does. While him asking for a car is partly to help them all move and commute faster, it's also something of a status symbol too, allowing him to show his girlfriend that he has aspirations and is moving on. Then there's Mi Jiyoung. She's the one whom we've been following the most and perhaps the one who's the easiest to empathize with. They say misery loves company, and although I'm not saying Gu and Mi Jiyoung are complete downers, they almost complete one another in what they want. Both want companionship but are so hurt and broken from their lives that they're not sure how to go about doing that, which is where the abrupt worship me comes into it. Anyway, the point I'm making is that this episode feels far more focused compared to last week's double bill, especially as there's a much more consistent rhythm to this one. The juxtaposition between the tranquil countryside and the bustling metropolis is far more prevalent here, and it adds up to one solid slice of life drama. And what about that Liberation Club at work? Genius. Roll on episode 4.